Tonight, the COVID tidal wave as Americans prepare to ring in a new year. The U.S. recording nearly 500,000 new cases in a single day. But with a lag in testing, one doctor told Top Story the number of infections is likely to double. A growing number of cities altering their New Year's Eve celebrations. New York City testing its iconic Times Square ball today, but will have a limited crowd at Countdown. And tonight, the warning from the CDC for anyone planning to go on a cruise. Also tonight, holiday travel mess. Delta and JetBlue already canceling flights through the New Year's weekend and beyond. One U.S. carrier asking anyone planning non-essential travel to stay home. The cancellations expected to welcome in 2022 as the country also braces for another round of severe weather. Maxwell's next steps. Ghislaine Maxwell found guilty on federal sex trafficking charges. Is this the end of her legal battle? And what could it mean for those in Jeffrey Epstein's social circle, including Prince Andrew? Tiger attack. The body camera footage showing police officers in Florida finding a zoo worker in the jaws of a tiger. Authorities forced to kill the big cat. The investigation tonight into what went wrong. Murdaugh family twist. The will from the wife of disgraced South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh, who's now jailed on multiple charges. What his wife left him before she and her son were murdered, plus the name crossed out. And good evening, everybody. I'm Aaron Gilchrist in for Tom Llamas tonight, with the country preparing to once again welcome a new year during a pandemic. This time, the country's seeing more single-day cases than ever before, nearly 2 million new infections in just a week. But with delays in testing and many using at-home tests, experts say the number of Americans with the virus is likely much higher. Still, many cities are moving forward with New Year's Eve celebrations. Final preps underway in Times Square, where a scaled-back vaccinated crowd will be welcomed. Let's get right to NBC's Sam Brock, who leads us off tonight.
Tonight, the U.S. is barreling toward the New Year's holiday under a tidal wave of new COVID cases, shattering the daily record with nearly 500,000 infections Wednesday, or roughly double the previous high last winter. The 1.9 million cases in a week means 3 Americans are now testing positive every single second, with New York City at the epicenter, notching 74,000 infections in 24 hours.
We want to show the world that New York City is fighting our way through this. It's really important to not give up in the face of this.
Rehearsals today for the Times Square ball drop for New Year's Eve still happening despite the new COVID benchmark. The city's test positivity rate is almost 20%, and deaths are nearing 100 per day for the first time in months. Critical city infrastructure getting hit hard. Some subway lines are shutting down because so many transit workers are ill. And the FDNY reporting 30% of EMS workers are out sick too. Now the cruise industry getting hit again after recent outbreaks. The CDC today warning travelers to avoid cruise travel regardless of vaccination status, because even fully vaccinated travelers may be at risk of getting and spreading COVID. The cruise industry calling the warning perplexing, saying only a very slim minority of those on board have tested positive.
Oh, I'm tired of it, man. It's getting super annoying.
But there is no sign of a letdown, only relentless lines to get tested, with an ongoing shortage of COVID tests nationwide. From Wisconsin,
I tried coming here yesterday, but the line was ridiculously long,
to Miami, where lines stretch literally for miles. Today, Florida also breaking its all-time record for daily positive cases.
What we've seen is an overwhelming spike in demand for tests.
Ron Gonsalves is the general manager of NOMI Health Testing in Florida.
Yesterday, we hit a record here, which was over 66,000 tests just here in Miami-Dade County alone.
The Biden administration under fire for not being prepared on testing, promising free at-home kits to all Americans starting at the beginning of January, but now saying they won't sign a contract with the test manufacturer until late next week. Meanwhile, the CDC says fewer hospitalizations suggest Omicron is presenting as a milder disease than previous variants. But the sheer scale of infection forcing 48 states to call upon the National Guard, including Wisconsin and Georgia, watching those boots on the ground roll in.
We are going to see the number of cases in this country rise so dramatically that we're going to have a hard time keeping everyday life operating.
And Sam Brock joins us live now. Sam, the FDA is said to be close to authorizing the Pfizer booster shot for kids 12 to 15. What more do you know about that?
Aaron, that's right. A person with knowledge of the plan tells NBC News that the FDA could be approving that Pfizer booster for kids in the coming days. Here is why that is significant for two reasons. One, the percentage of kids getting sick with COVID has gone up 50% just since the beginning of December. And two, tonight the CDC released several studies with kids in the vaccine. One of them looked at the population of children hospitalized with the virus. Aaron, 99% of them were unvaccinated. Back to you.
Sam Brock for us tonight in Florida. Sam, thank you. Now, those long testing lines frustrating millions across the country, really, and now fueling fears that the U.S. is failing to fully capture the magnitude of this Omicron surge. Health officials warning cases could be twice as high as currently reported. NBC's Gary Grumbach with that part of our story.
As the number of COVID cases skyrockets, tonight frustration over testing reaching an all-time high. What do you make of these lines?
Too long. Feels a little third country-ish. We should be doing a better job of this testing.
Ray Nowden among the hundreds trying to get a PCR test at this city-run site in Washington, D.C. Like so many Americans, he traveled to visit family for Christmas and is now hoping for a negative result. But like thousands of others, the long wait for results may make the tests irrelevant.
I want to get it before the New Year's Eve just to have a good time with my family and friends since we can't really go out and about. So hopefully it's going to be a negative result so I can have an enjoyable rest of the holiday season.
While some across D.C. are waiting for hours for a PCR test, others are opting for a much faster but less reliable at-home test. How long did you wait in line?
I probably waited 20 minutes.
The line to pick up at-home tests at this public library in D.C. moving quickly. The site handing out all of their 2,500 tests in just 2.5 hours.
We don't have no more tests, none.
Health officials fearing those take-home tests could lead to a massive underreporting of the true number of cases, as many states have no protocol in place to report at-home results, and people are unaware that they should. Even with record case numbers nationwide, with yesterday's total of nearly 500,000, experts saying we may be at twice that.
I think we're probably at 1 million plus cases a day because we have so many people that are not testing, can't get a test, or are testing at home, and that generally doesn't get reported into these statistics.
This week, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser announcing a test-to-return policy. 90,000 D.C. public school students must submit proof of a negative rapid test taken Tuesday, January 4th, in order to attend class in person on January 5th.
We're all for testing, yes, and, taking care of yourself and others.
Aline Valenzuela says she's grateful for the added measure. 3 members of her family tested positive earlier this month, including 3-year-old Emma Luna. Now they're hoping to start the new year with a negative COVID test result.
We have a little symptoms, but we are right now we are better. We have the vaccine, so
yes,
it works.
And Gary Grumbach joins us now from Washington, D.C. Gary, we saw that site you're at running out of those home tests today. What is the city doing to make sure that everybody who wants or needs one of these tests is actually able to get one?
Hey there, Aaron. Yeah, states seemingly caught flat-footed by the long lines we've seen, or really ramping up their testing capabilities this week. In Maryland, we're seeing 2 new mass testing sites opening tomorrow, and here in D.C., Mayor Muriel Bowser says she's ordered 1 million rapid tests, but they won't be here for a few weeks. Aaron?
Gary Grumbach for us in Washington tonight. A lot of coronavirus news to unpack this evening. Let's bring in NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres to answer some of our questions here. Dr. John, yesterday the U.S. broke its single-day case record, almost 500,000 cases. But with some doubts about whether rapid tests are actually picking up Omicron, and then there are so many home tests with results that go unreported, we know that for a fact. What do you think the actual number of cases is closer to right now, and does it really even matter at this point?
Well, Aaron, definitely we know that the number of cases are higher than what they are right now, and that's one of the issues we've had throughout the pandemic is the actual reporting of these cases. And it's, in fact, difficult to do, but I think they have a fairly good grasp on at least the trends that are going on here. And this trend is that the numbers are going up, which we knew would happen, but we didn't know they'd happen to quite this extent, and that's because of the Omicron variant. But you bring up a really good point, because the other thing we're noticing is even though cases are skyrocketing, hospitalizations aren't going up quite as much, although they are going up, and deaths have actually gone down. And so that's what we have been looking at lately, going, what metrics should we be measuring? And in fact, what most experts are saying is we should be looking at all of them. The cases give us an idea of what's going on in the trends. The hospitalizations and the deaths are looking at, okay, how much is this actually affecting us? And we know that it is still affecting us more than we want it to, and we need to take those protective measures to protect not just us, but those around us, Aaron.
You know, the CDC came out with that strong warning about cruises, saying that essentially don't get on a cruise regardless of your vaccination status right now. You know, why haven't the measures that these cruise lines put in place, the vaccine requirements, the negative tests, why haven't those things been enough to stop outbreaks on these ships?
And Aaron, in one word, Omicron. And we know these measures they put in place were doing fairly well against the different variants that are out there, including the Delta variant. And you can just look at the numbers of the U.S. ships, the ships that sailed in U.S. water, the cruise ships. There were around 160, 165 cases in the first couple of weeks of December. The last 2 weeks, 5,000 cases. And that's when Omicron is really starting to hit us hard. And what we know now is this is such a contagious virus that if you're vaccinated, if you have a booster, if you're wearing a mask, but you're in close proximity to somebody else, then you have that chance of catching it or spreading it to other people. And that's the big concern here. They're saying on a cruise ship, you really can't do much to avoid other people. And that's the concern why they're saying, regardless of vaccination status, regardless of booster status, you need to avoid cruise ships at this point. They also say if you do go on cruise ships, make sure you test before and afterwards, 1 to 3 days before, 3 to 5 days afterwards, because that can help. And then make sure that while you do that test afterwards, that you quarantine yourself just to make sure that you're not spreading it to other people if you're unvaccinated. But again, it's just showing you Omicron, how quickly this can spread, how easily it can spread, and how easily it can break through the protections that we do have.
And it'll be interesting to see if the CDC has that same recommendation in other environments as time goes on. I do want to ask you about a couple of things happening overseas. The health ministry in Israel has approved a 4th COVID shot for people who are immunocompromised. I know the U.S. only approved that a few months ago. Do you think that we could soon see a 4th shot here?
And I think what's going to happen is it's going to depend on where things go with the booster shot that we're getting right now for the vaccines that we have. And right now, so far, it looks like that booster shot is doing fairly well at keeping us protected from what we are concerned about, which is the serious illness, hospitalizations, and deaths, and to some extent from actually catching COVID, which is great. But what we don't know is how long is that going to last? And there's been back and forth in the study showing that it might not last as long as we want, but then other studies are saying, you know, it seems like it's doing pretty good, particularly at those 3 that we're talking about, the serious illness, hospitalizations, and death. So time will tell where we go with this. The battle right now are getting enough people booster shots so we can keep them protected, because we know that it's going to spread during these holiday seasons here.
All right, Dr. John Torres with us tonight. Dr. John, thank you, sir. We want to turn now to that winter weather we've been reporting on and the travel nightmare it's been creating. Thousands more flights have just been canceled ahead of New Year's this weekend, again because of dangerous weather and COVID staffing shortages. Steve Patterson now with the latest.
Tonight, the great cancellation of holiday air travel now on a collision course with the new year. After 4 days in a row of more than 1,000 cancellations, airlines are trimming down even more.
Got to the airport, got on the plane, everything was fine, and then one of the pilots didn't show up.
Delta already announcing a cutback of 200 to 300 flights every day through the New Year's weekend. Alaska Airlines thinning by 20%, strongly urging travelers with non-essential trips before January 2nd to rebook. And JetBlue canceling 1,280 flights from now until mid-January.
We're going to continue to see staffing shortages at the airlines, which are the primary factor of these cancellations. So simply put, there is no clear end in sight.
The chaos caused by surging Omicron cases impacting airline staff and bands of relentless severe weather lashing the country from coast to coast. 11 million in the south at risk of hail, powerful winds, and possible tornadoes by tomorrow, like what may have touched down in Alabama after it tore through the region.
We've got a lot of structure damage. We've got windows blown out. We've got roofs that are in the middle of the street.
And a massive winter storm is making its way east, expected to dump several inches of snow from Denver to Detroit, right in time for the holiday weekend.
They'll either send it out on Carousel 6.
A guarantee that this year's travel nightmare is also next year's. Steve Patterson, NBC News.
And we are also following some breaking news tonight. A state of emergency in Colorado. Several dangerous wildfires are burning there and forcing evacuations of thousands of homes. Crews outside Denver right now battling those flames. NBC's Emily Ikeda has the late developments.
You need to evacuate your homes as soon as possible and go as far east as you can.
Tonight, a life-threatening situation near Boulder, Colorado, where fires are forcing thousands of families to evacuate.
We saw a big plume of smoke over in that direction.
Flames reaching their doorsteps, people desperately trying to get to safety.
We're evacuating. We're going to try to go down either to Boulder, Denver, maybe the mountains. Just try to figure out something. God help us.
On foot and by car, entire communities on the move in a panicked escape from the fast-moving flames.
Just traffic, just so much traffic. That little town is just all trying to get out.
One hospital already treating at least 6 burn victims.
They are actively running from fire behind them.
Plumes of thick smoke darkening the sky everywhere residents turn.
The fire is crossing right at the golf course, and traffic is backed up in it.
A possible cause for the 3 fires, downed power lines, according to local officials, as whipping winds plague the area, strong enough to topple tractor trailers. All aircraft here grounded. Some gusts more than 110 miles per hour, making the fight for firefighters nearly impossible. The battle worsened by the parched grounds in Colorado, the area in an extreme drought with just 1.6 inches of rain since August. Potential relief, though, on the way, with snow forecasted to move in tomorrow. But for too many, it could be too late as furious flames burn a path of destruction. Emily Ikeda, NBC News.
Now to the meeting between President Biden and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. The White House saying the Russians requested that call amid mounting tensions. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel has the details.
Vladimir Putin had to wait until nearly midnight Moscow time for the call with President Biden. It seems when you ask for the call, you don't set the time. The call lasting less than an hour. The White House saying President Biden urged Putin to de-escalate tensions with Ukraine. Earlier, the Kremlin said Putin's goal was to hammer out an agenda ahead of key meetings with European allies, NATO members, and Russia in less than 2 weeks. Those talks are expected to focus on the crisis in Ukraine. U.S. officials warn Putin may invade the former Soviet state. Russian forces are still near the border, even after President Biden recently warned Putin of tough economic sanctions if he goes ahead. The front line in eastern Ukraine is a drab and muddy warren of trenches and minefields. When we visited a few weeks ago, soldiers told us without American and NATO support, they wouldn't be able to hold back the Russian army for long.
Putin, I think, not stop in the Ukraine. If we don't stop it here, they go further.
And Richard Engel joins us now. Richard, we know that Moscow asked for this call. The White House was a little uncertain about the entire agenda for the call. Is there any indication at this point of what could be next?
Very clear indications, and the Kremlin has made it clear from the start what it wanted out of this call. The Kremlin spokesman briefing reporters in Moscow ahead of the call and then giving a readout after the call. What Moscow wants, what Vladimir Putin wants, is to set the agenda for a series of negotiations, high-level, significant, detail-oriented negotiations that are due to begin in Geneva starting on January 10th, 10th, 12th, 13th. They will involve the U.S., European allies, NATO members, and Russia. And primary front and center on the agenda is policy about Ukraine. And what Putin wanted to do today was he did not want those talks to blindside the Russian side. He wanted to set the agenda with President Biden before those talks begin. So it is constructive diplomacy. You see Vladimir Putin reaching out to Biden, trying to have a kind of understanding before the next levels of negotiations begin. This is not the kind of thing that we have been seeing with the Russians over the last several years. It could be a bluff. It could be that Vladimir Putin is just trying to engage in diplomacy while he has another agenda, which could be taking a piece of Ukraine. But for the time being, it seems like he was trying to get his ducks in a row before a series of negotiations in Europe starting on the 10th.
Richard Engel for us tonight. Richard, thank you. And tonight, the defense team for Ghislaine Maxwell mounting an appeal. That after the longtime Jeffrey Epstein associate was convicted on sex trafficking charges. During the trial, 4 women described being abused as teens at several of Epstein's homes. Here's Kathy Park to break down the verdict.
Tonight, vindication for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein after a New York jury found British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of sex trafficking charges.
We have a lot of work to do.
Annie Farmer was one of 4 women who took the stand. She told the court how Maxwell lured her into Epstein's orbit as a teen. Today, she spoke with Good Morning America.
It's a very rare opportunity to be able to be in court and tell your story and to see the person that perpetrated the abuse held accountable.
The jury convicted Maxwell on 5 of the 6 federal charges. 2 of the counts related to sex trafficking of minors. 3 were for conspiracy.
Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict.
Her attorneys say they're already working on an appeal.
And we are confident that she will be vindicated.
Virginia Roberts Giuffre, a vocal Epstein survivor who did not testify and wasn't part of this case, says a conviction is a step toward justice.
We were told constantly, you know, these people will never go to jail. They're too powerful. They're too rich. And we live in a new day. And it just goes to show that, you know, this is not the end. This is just the beginning. There's others who are involved that made this sex trafficking operation possible. And I hope that we start to see some of the other big ones fall as well. I hope this is a message to them. I hope they know that Maxwell is just the beginning.
As Maxwell awaits sentencing, questions swirl about whether there could be more fallout for others.
Does she have any opportunity to cooperate with law enforcement?
I think it is quite possible that other men could find themselves being held accountable if Ghislaine Maxwell decides to cooperate. Of course, her cooperation alone would likely not be enough because she has certainly some biases and motives to lie to reduce her own sentence. But oftentimes a cooperator like that can point to dates and records, and then prosecutors can go obtain those records, hotel records, flight records, bank records, and other kinds of things that can corroborate the story. And then that person really just works as a narrator, and the documents do the heavy lifting of proving the case.
Meanwhile, the legal battle for Maxwell isn't over. She still faces 2 perjury charges, which were not part of this trial. Aaron?
Kathy Park in Lower Manhattan tonight, thank you. And there's more breaking news, this time on that truck driver who was sentenced to 110 years in prison for a deadly highway crash. Colorado's governor has commuted Rogel Aguilera Mederos' sentence to 10 years. He was convicted on 27 charges for a fiery crash that killed 4 people in 2019. A petition calling for clemency was signed by more than 5 million people. NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos joins us now to talk a little bit more about this reduced sentence. Danny, so we were looking at a 110-year sentence for this crash that just came down about 2 weeks ago. The DA there in Colorado had said that had requested a resentencing hearing. That was on the calendar. How unusual is it that the decision for clemency came so quickly and that the sentence was reduced by so much, from basically life in prison to 10 years?
So unusual that we're not likely to see anything like this again. But then again, this is an unusual situation. You have a weird combination of mandatory minimum sentences that led to this completely bizarre, unexpected result that is uncommon. But as a defense attorney, that's exactly the problem with mandatory minimums, is that they take the power away from the judge, who should have the power to sentence, and they give that power almost exclusively to the prosecutor. A little too much power in the prosecutor's hand. The reason this happened so quickly is that it was so apparently a sentence that was beyond the pale for sentences for conduct of this type, especially given the facts and circumstances. Of course, a tragic crash, tragic result, but this sentence, 110 years, was not within the heartland of similar sentences.
So, Danny, we saw the governor get ahead of the legal process in a lot of ways before the appeal, before this resentencing hearing. We also saw the defendant here, that young man, openly sobbing in court when the sentence was handed down. That went viral. People online were talking about it all over the country. As you said, the judge admitted that his hands were tied with the mandatory minimum sentence laws. We saw the online petition for clemency getting more than 5 million signatures. Truckers also, got on the road and protested that sentence. Do you think this commutation was about public pressure, or was it about the sentencing laws being so messed up?
Yeah. Realistically, all commutations, all pardons, all grants of clemency are essentially at their core political in nature. That's because governors and presidents receive so many requests for pardons and commutations that only a tiny fraction are actually considered. In the federal system, it's by the Pardon Office, which looks at the entire file. But as we know also, governors and presidents often pardon political allies, people that they have that they know will advance them politically. And of course, they pardon people who will damage them politically. And that's why they do it typically on their last day in office, where they have the least political exposure. So pardons have been political since they came over from England on the boat. They've always been that way, and so they will continue to be that way. They really are such a rare part of the criminal defense practice that I don't even know anyone who practices pardon law. That's how rare it is.
All right, NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos with us tonight. Danny, thank you. We are learning more tonight about a horrific tiger attack at a Florida zoo. A 26-year-old custodian reaching into a tiger enclosure after hours and nearly losing his arm. Officers forced to shoot the endangered animal. Now that man is potentially facing charges. NBC's Kerry Sanders has the body cam footage and a warning. This video may be disturbing.
At the Naples, Florida Zoo, deputies approached the tiger exhibit, and there, through the fence, a man's bloodied left arm clenched in a tiger's powerful jaws.
Oh my God. Is that real?
Oh my God. Investigators say the 26-year-old custodian had gone where he wasn't allowed after hours, reaching through the fence to either pet or feed the tiger. A deputy fired a single gunshot. The tiger released 26-year-old River Rosenquist. The big cat named Echo retreated, then died. Echo, an 8-year-old Malayan tiger, the rarest of all tiger species. It's estimated there are fewer than 300 left on Earth. The first 911 call for help came from the custodian himself.
What's happening?
I'm being attacked by a tiger. Please, please, please.
You're being attacked by a tiger?
In the chaos and horrific pain, Rosenquist apologized for his actions.
Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
A state and federal wildlife investigation is now underway.
We are grieving. It is a sad day for sure.
I hope he's also held liable for the death of this amazing animal.
Do you think the deputy had a choice at that point?
That police officer made the right decision. He should be praised for going in there and saving that man's life.
That 26-year-old tonight in stable condition, potentially, say investigators, facing charges, learning the hard way, you can take an animal out of the wild, but you cannot take the wild out of an animal.
And Kerry Sanders joins us now from Fort Lauderdale. Kerry, you know, I got to wonder, how did this guy get so close to that enclosure?
Well, there is no way that he didn't know what he was doing. The Naples Zoo is a fully accredited zoo, which means that there are multiple layers that keep the public away from getting too close to an exhibit. So he had to go over several barriers to get there, and clearly did it after hours when nobody was watching. Aaron?
Kerry, has he been talking at all? Any idea what he could have been thinking to reach in like that?
Well, you know, some of the experts say that their greatest concern is that there have been so many social media videos, as well as the Tiger King, which was very popular when the pandemic began, where people got a chance to see what seemed like average people interacting with big cats and petting them and hugging them, and may have just been lulled into the belief that this Malayan tiger somehow fit into that category. But at the end, as we noted, a wild animal is indeed a wild animal, in this case acting the way a wild animal does, Aaron.
Kerry Sanders in Fort Lauderdale. Kerry, thank you. And still much more ahead tonight. Officers shot. A police sergeant killed, another injured while responding to a call at a motel. The manhunt underway for a suspect. And Murdaugh family twist. The murder investigation into the wife of a disgraced South Carolina attorney. What she left her husband in her will and the name that was crossed off. Stay with us. Top story is just getting started. Back now with the latest twist in the mystery surrounding disgraced South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh. His wife and son murdered at their home back in June. Tonight, his late wife's will revealing that she left her entire estate to him, but also showing one mysterious edit. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard has more.
Tonight, yet another twist in the saga involving the once prominent South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh and the multiple deaths in his family. Newly revealed documents raising questions about his wife, Maggie Murdaugh. In June, she and their son, Paul, were found murdered at home, shot multiple times. Authorities are still investigating their killings. Now, according to a copy originally signed in 2005 of her last will and testament obtained by NBC News through the probate process, Maggie Murdaugh would leave all property to her husband, but oversight of the estate in the event of her death was given to her sister Marion. But at some point, her sister's name was crossed out, replaced with Alec Murdaugh's own father, written in ink. Just 3 days after Maggie's murder, Alec's father, Randolph, died. His law firm said it was of a previous illness.
I understand that the handwriting does appear to be hers, and so one would like to think, and I do think, that it was done legitimately. However, given the twists that have happened in this case and the charges that have been lodged, I'm sure everything's going to be scrutinized quite closely here.
Murdaugh is facing a storm of allegations surrounding his money, including allegations that he misused funds from his law firm, leading to the suspension of his law license, and insurance fraud charges for allegedly enlisting a hitman to help kill himself so that his surviving son could collect a $10 million life insurance policy. Murdaugh blaming his opioid addiction.
That opioid addiction, frankly, put him on the brink of losing his life. He attempted to commit suicide at the hand of another. And fortunately for him, his family, and those who love him, that was not successful.
Murdaugh also faces charges for withholding millions of dollars he allegedly owes to his family's former housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield. She died at the Murdaugh family's estate back in 2018. Authorities called it an accident, saying she tripped over the family dogs. Murdaugh's lawyer acknowledging in October Murdaugh's legal troubles.
He has indicated clearly that he is going to try to right every wrong, financial wrong, and others that he may have committed. Look, he's reconciled to the fact he's going to prison.
Earlier this month, a South Carolina judge set a $7 million bond against him after a state grand jury brought 48 charges against him, alleging he defrauded about a dozen clients out of more than $6 million.
Heading into 2022, what does Alec Murdaugh's legal future here with these cases look like?
This case has had more twists and turns than one could have possibly imagined. It's very difficult to see how he would not be facing a very, very long prison sentence here in South Carolina.
And Vaughn Hilliard joins us now here in New York. Vaughn, have there been any charges yet for any of the deaths of the people close to Alex Murdaugh?
No, Aaron, and each of the charges against Murdaugh have been tied to those allegations of financial fraud. Murdaugh himself has continued to deny any involvement in the death of his wife, his son, and that longtime housekeeper. As you just heard from his lawyer, he has, though, acknowledged those efforts in an attempt to have himself killed, but he has blamed that incident on opioid withdrawals. We should note we have also reached out to Murdaugh's attorney about his wife's will, but we have not heard back. Aaron?
Vaughn Hilliard with us tonight. Vaughn, thank you. When we come back, battling Omicron abroad. South America has the highest vaccination rate in the world, but the concern tonight, their vaccines may not be a match for the new variants. And the champagne shortage one day before New Year's Eve, how the pandemic and climate change could keep your favorite brands off the shelves. That's next. Back now with Top Stories news feed and the manhunt tonight for the person who shot 2 police officers, killing one of them. The officers were responding to a call about an unattended vehicle at a motel about 60 miles outside Chicago. 25-year-old Darius Sullivan allegedly shot them when they arrived at his room. A police sergeant died at the hospital. The other officer is in critical condition. A major court decision today in the opioid crisis, a New York jury finding Teva Pharmaceuticals responsible for thousands of opioid-related deaths. State Attorney General Letitia James arguing the company deceived Americans about how much damage opioids can cause. This comes after more than 24 of the lawsuit's original defendants settled with the state for $1.7 billion. And your favorite New Year's Eve bubbly may be harder to come by this year. In addition to delivery issues, experts say champagne makers are struggling to keep up with the recent spike in demand after cutting production earlier in the pandemic. Extreme weather also hitting France's Champagne region, leading to the smallest harvest in decades. At the same time, a lot of restaurants are feeling the impact the Omicron variant is having on their bottom lines. NBC's Jake Ward now explaining this is a critical time for restaurants that were hoping a big New Year's celebration would boost them into 2022.
For restaurants, New Year's Eve is often thought of as the finish line.
From a financial standpoint, a New Year's Eve can actually be about 2 days worth of revenue packed into one night.
But this year will not end on that high note for many in the hospitality business. Reports of restaurants closing or cutting off service early on New Year's, what is usually one of their busiest nights. This one in the heart of Times Square.
We just didn't have the sales to warrant opening, and so we made the call to close.
Some restaurants are taking precautions a step further. Otway in Brooklyn is requiring a negative COVID test for guests on New Year's Eve.
We have an 18-person staff and everybody's been consistently getting tested. So if we can do it, we feel like the general public should be able to handle that for one night.
Here on the Embarcadero, one of San Francisco's great public spaces, some of the best-known restaurants in the nation are preparing for another New Year's Eve without record revenues. Restaurant owners here are faced with Omicron, which is causing them to restrict intimacy and ambiance in the name of customer safety. This was supposed to be a comeback night for dining out after a long 2 years. 2020 was the worst year in the industry's history. 110,000 eating and drinking establishments wiped out, 2.5 million jobs gone. This year saw a comeback. Sales were up nearly 20% from 2020. But new variants like Omicron could erase some of those gains. When Delta hit, 20% of people stopped going out to eat entirely. So what do restaurants hope the new year brings?
We would like to be able to focus more on the food, the wine, and the guest satisfaction.
Another year ending for an industry at the mercy of an ever-changing pandemic. Jake Ward, NBC News, San Francisco.
And we stay with the pandemic now as we turn to the Americas. Tonight, despite very high vaccination rates in South America, public health officials there are battling vaccine misinformation from the highest levels of government. This amid concerns the vaccines used in the region may not work against the new COVID strains. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson has more.
South America, where at one point mass graves stretched farther than the eye could see, a reminder of COVID-19's deadly toll, is now emerging as a frontrunner in the race to vaccinate.
South America is the region with the highest vaccination rates.
Some parts of the continent now surpassing Europe and North America in inoculations. In Chile, a whopping 87% of the population is fully vaccinated. Italy and France are both at 74%, with the United States at roughly 62%. In all, South America has more than 63% of its population fully vaccinated.
South America has taken off with its vaccination. Brazil is an excellent example of how vaccination, once supply chains were secured, rolled them out very quickly and now have higher rates of vaccine coverage than places like the United States.
But in Brazil, where more than 600,000 have died from the virus, public health officials are also battling skepticism and misinformation from those in power. President Jair Bolsonaro has yet to get vaccinated and continues to publicly criticize the efficacy and regulation of vaccines.
Efeito colateral, problema qualquer, já sabe que não vão cobrar de mim.
But officials are now bracing for yet another problem.
The worst case scenario is a real substantial hit to our vaccine efficacy.
Many of the South American countries use non-mRNA vaccines like Sinovac and AstraZeneca early on in their vaccination efforts. Now, scientists say people who receive those vaccines could be vulnerable as new variants emerge.
Those vaccines did their job. Problem now is that those vaccines may be ineffective against Omicron.
Even if the region is successful in boosting its population against Omicron, the devastating impacts of the years-long pandemic won't be easily overcome. The pandemic has worsened already dire conditions in countries like Honduras, Guatemala, and Venezuela. A new report by the United Nations finds hunger in Latin America and the Caribbean is at its highest in 2 decades, affecting more than 59 million people.
What is important is to prioritize the most vulnerable groups. They have more difficult to access
less healthy foods than before the pandemic. And that's mostly because they don't have enough money to buy the foods, and also the fear of getting COVID.
Fear that health experts in South America and the rest of the world say can be eliminated by getting vaccinated.
What we need to do is to invest heavily in boosters, and boosters not just for the industrialized wealthy countries, such as in Europe or United States, but also for regions in South America. I think there's an important lesson learned that with good public health interventions, you can protect your regions.
And Priscilla Thompson joins us now. You know, Priscilla, it really seems inevitable that variants like Omicron are going to reach these countries. How are they getting ready? How are they preparing for that?
Well, Aaron, on one hand, these countries have pretty robust vaccination systems that people trust because of the infectious disease outbreaks they've had to deal with in the past several decades. But on the other hand, there is the question of the effectiveness of these non-mRNA vaccines against the Omicron variant. And that's something that researchers in these countries, in this region, are working to determine whether they should be telling officials to stock up on those mRNA vaccines, and that when people get boosted, they get boosted with those vaccines in order to offer that extra protection. Aaron?
All right, Priscilla Thompson for us tonight. Priscilla, thank you. And coming up, New Year's Eve around the world. How other countries are ringing in 2022 as Omicron cases surge and the major cities forced to cancel their celebrations. We'll be right back. Back now with Top Stories Global Watch, and we're looking at how some cities around the world are ringing in the new year amid a new wave of Omicron cases. In about 12 hours, a fireworks display will be back over the Sydney Opera House after it was canceled last year. Tickets will be required, and revelers are urged to be vaccinated there. Berlin will air its annual party on TV, but will not allow an in-person audience. Gatherings with more than 10 guests are banned across Germany now. Other European cities like Paris, London, Rome, they're all canceling their events. Rio de Janeiro will go ahead with its world-famous fireworks show on Copacabana Beach. However, there will be no stage shows there this year. I'm Aaron Gilchrist in New York. On behalf of Tom Llamas, we would like to take a moment to recognize all the people who make Top Story possible. And from all of us, Happy New Year.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.